Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for participating in this year's Sociable City Virtual Summit. We look forward to continued sessions over the next couple of days and insightful presentations by some of our speakers and panelists. I'm here to just give a little bit of background on myself and the evolution of RHI and some of the philosophy that we bring to working with cities. On a personal level, my early work was in the hospitality industry, began working as a bartender and eventually managed a music DJ venue in 1972 in New York. Later went on to work in restaurants in the Hamptons and DC, and eventually opened up my own restaurant in Pittsburgh. My degree is in hotel and restaurant administration, and then I also have a graduate degree in counseling. I worked as a counselor for people arrested for drunk driving, and then later volunteered as a suicide prevention counselor. So it was these experiences that led me to begin RHI, the Responsible Hospitality Institute, in 1983, mostly because at the time we wanted to really build a network where people from diverse perspectives can come together and find some commonality, particularly as it related to a concept that we were developing called responsible beverage service, which was the training of people who work in bars and restaurants to be part of the solution to drunk driving and underage drinking. Back in '89, we moved to California, where we set up an office because we had multiple projects beginning throughout the state and also throughout the country that really were built more around community organizing and developing strategies that engage community leaders together. And it was during this time that I began to see really the evolution of a philosophy or the way in which I understood my own experiencing working in hospitality and then also working in counseling. And I think the two overlap pretty significantly because relationships are really formed through how we socialize. And sociability is sharing an experience with other people that stimulates the senses, intellect, or emotions. And then reflecting on my own work in the hospitality industry, it was always creating the social space for people to dine, drink, listen, and dance. And responsible hospitality, which is in our name, is assuring that there's a safe and secure environment for all that participate. So it's this philosophy that we began to develop and expand as we began to work with communities. In August of '89, I moved to California, as I said, but 2 months later, there was the Loma Prieta earthquake in Santa Cruz, which devastated downtown Santa Cruz. In retrospect, as I got more involved in working with downtowns and downtown planning, I began to realize the importance of how Santa Cruz recovered. First of all, because it was beginning the holiday season, many of the retail stores really had lost that opportunity to open up because all of downtown was cordoned off, the streets were ripped up, buildings were collapsing. And so the city quickly mobilized and created a tent city with huge tents that provided the space for people to open up their stores during the holiday season. One example of community organizing was Bookshop Santa Cruz, where hundreds of volunteers moved thousands of books into the tent that was created for Bookshop Santa Cruz. And that store, once it came back again, is still open in spite of a lot of competition from other bookstores. But it was also the way in which they rebuilt the downtown. Clearly, they had to think about rebuilding the infrastructure, building the roads, building the sidewalks. But there was a vision, a community group that came together and said, let's reimagine our downtown. And that led to the expanded sidewalks, plazas where they could offer more street performers and entertainers. And all of this was happening at a time when people really were not sure of what downtown Santa Cruz would become. And the tent city remained open for years. And people really tried to support the local businesses, but it was very difficult. In many ways, it's very similar to what many downtowns face today or may face over the next few years in trying to reimagine their downtown and particularly their social experience. It took a while to bring people back downtown, and only through events, the first night on New Year's Eve and other major events, did people start to realize that downtown was coming back to life. One of the lessons learned is really that creating that vision, having that map, having that blueprint of what the key stakeholders in the city want, and then mobilizing the resources to make the infrastructure and strategic and promotional outcomes that would be necessary. So now Santa Cruz, like many cities, are trying to figure out ways in which to come back again. And in my early life, when I was in school, I played in an orchestra, and I've enjoyed music for many, many years. And obviously, in this work where we travel in helping cities, not only in the United States, but I've been fortunate to travel basically to every continent in the world except Antarctica, and spent many, many hours in nightlife districts and going to venues and dance clubs and music performances, and really began to put into place the role of bringing together the various instruments that play in a band or in an orchestra. And it all has to begin with the composer, the person who organizes how the notes are going to be played, what instruments are going to be part of the performance, and how those instruments will play in sequence. And this whole idea of recognizing that we need to see music really as the lubricant of sociability is also a good way to understand the lessons learned in Santa Cruz and what you might apply in the future. And that is to recognize that while all of these instruments play in different ways and have different tones and sounds, ultimately it's the conductor, the one who understands not only the composition of the music that was created, but also has to understand, although may not necessarily have to know how to play the instruments, at least to know when they're supposed to start, when they're supposed to end, the volume at which they're supposed to play, and that conductor leads that process. So now, as downtowns are beginning to reimagine their sociability or their social economy and nightlife, they have to begin to build an alliance, the Social Economy Alliance, and look at the future of sociability in their own city and downtown. And so we've begun to organize what we believe are the same types of sections of that social economy that an orchestra would have. On the one hand, you have hospitality, which is dining and tourism, as well as culture, which is music and performance. But these are just the aspects that add vibrancy to a downtown. You have to include safety, which is licensing and compliance, so that the boundaries of rules and operations are clearly defined and that you begin to recognize the responsibilities of all to assure that safety. Communities with residents and advocates have to have a seat at the table. And as more cities have expanded their outdoor dining and rooftops and taken over parking lanes to add outdoor seating in areas that may have been traditionally residential, those same conflicts that occurred at night when residents complained about sound disturbances to their sleep, we believe that over time, these same kind of sound disturbances may occur during the daytime with residents who are working out of their homes. And so you're beginning to see that day life and nightlife may become equally challenging as you're moving forward in planning your districts. Development with planning and mobility obviously are another key components of this overall social economy plan. And it will be the planners and the developers and the cities who begin to recognize that that temporary expansion of outdoor seating and activities and sidewalks and all of those things that help businesses survive may become more permanent because the public has gotten used to it and actually find it quite desirable. But in communities that have colder climates, the time frame in which that can happen is inhibited. And while heat lamps became quite popular, as you began to get into seasons where there might be precipitation and tents were built, that whole propane heating system may not have been the best and safest solution. So In the future, as you begin to think about that expanded outdoor activity, you may want to think about building the infrastructure. That would include the electrical process to hook up heaters that would be safer and much more centrally controlled, or even adding gas lines for the gas heaters that you might want to continue to have. And so these are some of the planning infrastructure changes that might be necessary as you move forward. But also, if take-home dining or takeout dining continues to be a popular aspect, particularly with people who want to use the home transport systems like Uber Eats and others, there has to be a way in which those drivers can pick up their food. And if you've taken over your parking spaces to expand outdoor dining, or in some cases close the streets, the mobility issue will become even more important, because you have to have a strategy for how to coordinate this. Different stakeholders have to come together, which, as you begin to look at traffic control, you have to look at compliance and police and pedestrian management, and where people will be picked up and dropped off if they're relying upon the Uber and Lyft and other drive services or taxis. Because for the short term anyhow, many cities' public transportation systems may not be into the extended hours like they were before. And so you see an increased use of automobiles or people biking or walking to their nightlife districts. But importantly, you have to also begin to set up the systems, the infrastructure for evaluating the economic trends that are going to happen. So I hope that this summit brought together all of the information that you might need in moving forward. And I want you to recognize that really the end goal of all of our work as it relates to reimagining sociability is reimagining how we're going to create those social spaces for people to dine, drink, listen, and dance. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your participating in the summit. And we hope that you'll join us next year in DC as we move to an on-site summit. And we know that DC is welcoming our group and will showcase how over the next year they've recovered and created these social experiences. Thank you and good luck, and enjoy the rest of our program.